All right, my name is Hunter, and this is week 7 of the Principles of Biology review sessions. We're doing population ecology today. So we have transcended the level of the individual organism, and now we are looking at many organisms, populations, and communities of organisms. First up, we're going to talk about methods. Yeah, we're at the top here. Methods we can use to determine population size. So to measure the population density of chipmunks occupying a particular park, you sample several quadrants and capture 50 chipmunks. All right, so 50 chipmunks. You mark each of their backs with a small dot of red paint and then release them. The next day you capture another 50 chipmunks, and among the 50, you find that 10 are marked. Using a mark recapture formula, the formula below, how many chipmunks do you estimate the population contains? All right, so let's define some of our variables here. We have N1 is presumably the number that we marked in the first catch, and we have capital N, the total population. We don't know the total population number. We are trying to infer that number based on the number we captured on the first survey and the number that we recaptured in the second. So that's that subscript 2. So our N1, we initially captured 50 chipmunks, equals 50. And we marked each of their backs with a red dot. The next day we captured another 50 chipmunks. So that is N2, that is our sample size, sample set 2, is another 50 chipmunks. And among the 50 we find that 10 are marked. So M2 equals 10. Let's go ahead and write our formula. We've got 10 over 50 equals 50 over N. Now we rearrange this to solve for N. So multiply both sides by N. And then we can take the reciprocal of our fraction, move that over. We've got 50 times 50 over 10. I'm going to make that look a little bit more like a 50. We can plug that into the calculator, or we can do this in our head. But we should get a result of N equals 250 chipmunks. Yeah, so 5 times 5 is 25. Add 2 zeros would be 2,500. Divide by 10, get rid of a 0. Gives you 250. All right. I'm going to get rid of my face here so that we can see the full screen. Okay. All right. So, based on our capture-recapture method, we can infer that there are 250 chipmunks in this park. That represents the entire population. So what effect, we're on to the next problem now, what effect would each of the following discoveries have on your estimate? 1. You later discover that you sampled one area of the park that was most favored by the chipmunks. Most favored by the chipmunks. So based on the language of this, most favored, we have to infer from this that there are more chipmunks in this spot of the park than anywhere else, and everywhere else there are fewer chipmunks. This would lead us to the conclusion that although, let's see, here we go. I'm aware that I have atrocious handwriting, so I'm going to, when we're doing writing like this, I'm going to switch back to typing for y'all. So if the area was favored by the chipmunks, then we most likely captured more chipmunks in this area than we would have caught if we picked a different area of the park. So as a result, our estimate of the population size would be larger than if we had sampled more of the park. So if the area was favored by the chipmunks, we most likely captured more chipmunks in this area than we would have caught in other areas of the park. Therefore, our estimate is probably too large, or larger than the actual population. All right, so the second discovery, how would this affect our conclusion? You later discovered that the chipmunks were licking the marks off of each other's backs. All right, so this says nothing about whether the area was favored. This is simply just a weird, we could call this an error in the experiment. We later discovered that the chipmunks were licking the marks off of each other's backs. So in this case, some of the recaptured chipmunks that were counted as unmarked could, of course, have been among those that had their marks licked off, and as a result, our estimate of the population size would be, Now I'm reading my answer key, and this feels counterintuitive, so we're going to work through it. Some of the recaptured chipmunks that were counted as unmarked would have been among those that had their marks licked off. Oh no, this makes sense. As a result, our estimate of the population size would be higher than if the marks had not been licked off. So for example, if 10 of those captured had licked off their marks, the actual recapture ratio would have been 20 to 50 instead of 10 to 50, or 10 over 50. So then the population estimate would change to 125 rather than 250 chipmunks in the population. Yeah, all right. So if some of the recaptured chipmunks that were counted as unmarked were among those that had their marks licked off, our estimated population size would be higher than if the marks had not been licked off. And I'm going to go back to my tablet so that we can kind of draw this mathematical relationship, make it a little bit clearer. I will say one of the things that I personally struggle with sometimes with these quantitative reasoning problems is just understanding what this equation, how this equation would change. So if the numbers of recapture on the second catch, that M2 number, were actually 20 out of 50, right? 2/5 is much greater than 1/5, right? So this is if the marks hadn't been licked off and we actually got to count all of them. Rearranging our equation, we would have, 50 times 50 over 20 equals n, would give us 125. So if the marks had been licked off, our estimate would have been too large. It would have been inflated at that 250 from before. All right. Third option. You later discovered that the marked chipmunks are easier to see and therefore more susceptible to predation. More susceptible to predation. So if in the time between when we marked them and when we do our second survey, a bunch of the marked ones got eaten, that's going to give us a smaller number that we can recapture from that were previously marked, and that's going to give us a smaller numerator again. Remember, oop. That's going to change our number again so that it looks more like this one, but it'll be even smaller than in the first problem. It'll be like 5 out of 50 maybe. And so in that case, once we rearrange this equation, we're going to have an even greater artificially inflated estimated population. So again, in other words, if more marked chipmunks are captured by predators, we would recapture fewer marked chipmunks than we should. So let's go ahead and type that. If more marked chipmunks are captured by predators, we would recapture fewer marked chipmunks than we should, and therefore the population size we calculate would also be reduced. And in this case, we really couldn't accurately quantify the population size. All right, so what modifications could you make to your sampling program to help ensure more accurate estimates of population size? At a minimum, we can sample several areas of the park. We're basically breaking down the problems from the issues from the previous 3 questions and discussing how we could address them. The first one, we discovered that we sampled an area of the park that was favored by the chipmunks, and so our estimate was really high. We can solve that by sampling more areas of the park. Sample several areas of the park. The second problem was they were licking off the marks. We can, of course, just use a marking system that's not easily removed. Use a marking system that cannot be removed easily. And finally, we had an issue of increased predation because our marks made them easier for predators to find. So we would have to use a marking system that's not easily detected by predators. So use a marking system that is not easily detected by predators. All right. The following table provides the numbers of deaths per acre per year. Numbers of deaths per acre per year, resulting from the operation of 2 different agents of mortality in populations of grasshoppers at several different density levels. I love these kinds of problems because it's a little bit like a word salad puzzle. And really the only way that I know how to do these is kind of to... Actually, I'm going to go back to the tablet, I'm sorry. The reason you're seeing the window change size here is as I'm moving between screens. Sorry. So let's see here. Fill in the mortality rates for agents A and B on this table. So the agent of mortality is what is killing them, presumably. In populations of grasshoppers at several different density levels. So density levels being more grasshoppers per unit area, I presume? Yep, individuals per acre. Individuals per acre. All right. So we have population density in our left column. We have deaths per acre per year, and our annual mortality rate. And each of those 2 columns is broken down by agent A and agent B. Okay. So grasshoppers, in a population density of 100 grasshoppers per acre, individuals per acre, Agent A kills 4 of them. All right, 4 out of 100 is pretty easy math. That's 4%. And Agent B is 0. Similarly, in the next row, we have 1,000 individuals per acre. Agent A kills 40. We've simply added a 0. That is still 4%. Phew, 4%. And 25 were killed by Agent B. 25 were killed by Agent B. .25 happens to be 2.5% of 1,000. $10,000 individuals per acre. And again, we're just adding a 0. We've got 400 deaths by Agent A. Are we seeing a trend emerge here? But we have 500 individuals killed by Agent B. 500 divided by 10,000 is simply 5%, or 0.05. This will hopefully be review for most of you, but .04 times 100% equals 4%. 4% and 0.04 mean the same thing. So if I ever express these as that, kind of means the same thing. And finally, we have 100,000 individuals. 50,000 of them are killed by Agent B. That is a 50% mortality rate. So without even getting into other questions here, we can see this graphed now in the chart below it, in part B. We have Agent A has these little diamonds on them, remains constant, and Agent B has the squares. And we see this huge increase once we get to a certain population density. So what we can say with some confidence is that Agent B is a population density dependent mortality factor. Ooh, fantastic. Okay, we've got some participation in the chat. Thank you. Thank you for jumping in. Yeah, so I just want to make sure I haven't missed anything else. I'm sorry. Okay. All right, so now we've graphed this data. Let's answer some questions about it. Which of the two agents of mortality, A or B, is operating in a density-independent manner? And explain your answer. So no matter how many individuals we had in that acre, that unit area, 100, 1,000, 10,000, or 100,000, Agent A appears to remain constant at 4%. So you have more absolute numbers of individuals dying, but it is increasing at the same rate as the population density. So that is what we would call density independent. Density independent. So regardless of the population size per acre, Agent A only kills 4% of the population. In other words, it's working in a density-independent manner. Agent B, by contrast, is acting in a density-dependent manner. Density-dependent. Let me type that. Agent B is acting in a density-dependent manner because as the density changes, the percentage of individuals killed by Agent B also changes. And in this example, as the density of grasshoppers increases, the percentage of grasshoppers killed per acre also increases. Which of the two agents of mortality, A or B, is likely to act as a factor stabilizing the size of the grasshopper population? And explain your answer. What do we mean by stabilizing the population? If an agent of mortality, if something that is killing these grasshoppers just kills all of the grasshoppers indiscriminately, would that be a stabilizing factor? The answer, of course, is no, because that would be an extinction level event for that population of grasshoppers. So we need something that also doesn't remain constant. Because remember, Agent A removes only 4% of the population, no matter how large that population gets. So that seems like there's some kind of endemic, something that is killing that small number of grasshoppers, but again, is not density dependent. Agent B, however, removes an increasing percentage of the grasshoppers as the population size increases. When we got to, let me scroll up to that visualization again. When we got to some critical threshold, the death rate exploded due to Agent B. This is what we would call a stabilizing mortality agent, where 10,000 individuals is the critical mass of whatever this environment is. So no matter how large the population gets, Agent A only removes 4% of individuals. In contrast, Agent B removes an increasing percentage of the grasshoppers as population size increases. Therefore, we can say that Agent B is more likely to act to stabilize the size of the population over time. So when we say a stabilizing factor, in this context, we are talking about maintaining a population that the environment can support. We are avoiding overpopulation. So we don't have a lot of people tuned in live on the stream, but I do want to open it up to questions. This was a mercifully short worksheet. That's really all I got for you. But this is one of the few times in this class where we have really explicit kind of quantitative reasoning to kind of back up the observations that we're making, which is fun and different and interesting. So, and for me, very challenging. So if you have any questions, drop them in the chat. I will hang out for a few more minutes. Otherwise, go reclaim that time, enjoy the rest of your evening, get out in the sun if you can, and I will see you all next week. I've thought of a bonus question, which maybe this will be part of the next population ecology chapter, because it looks like we have another one. Community ecology, yep. What is the carrying capacity of this environment, or this population of grasshoppers? The stable population, we said, was around 10,000 individuals. That was when the mortality rate through Agent B really, really skyrocketed. And so we could say that the carrying capacity for grasshoppers of this environment was around 10,000 individuals. You would also reasonably see a lot of variation year to year, or fluctuations in the numbers of individuals. This is called population dynamics. I'm basically pulling from the flashcards that I made from last year. To see what else we can cover. And again, if you're watching this in the future, there's no need to stick around for this part. It's not on the worksheet. You won't be graded on it. These are just things that I found interesting or helpful I found them important enough to retain when I took this class last year. So let's see. Ooh, I've got a couple questions in here about survivorship curves. This feels like an easy one to visualize. And I know that this came up on an exam question. So the example problem. The example question is, an oak tree produces thousands of acorns. But very few grow into mature oak trees. The oak tree exhibits what type of a survivorship curve? The oak tree exhibits a blank survivorship curve. And to explain this concept, we have to do a little bit of drawing. Ooh, I can use the shapes function to give you an x and y axis, preferably not in that color. Here we go. All right. So we have time on our x-axis and relative abundance. I'll just do an A. So in time, we're also looking at the age of the organisms. So we would have very, very young on the left-hand side of our x-axis and very, very old on the extreme right. I'm going to put that young and old. And then relative abundance, we would have lots of individuals at the top and very few at the bottom. So a type 3 survivorship curve is represented by lots and lots of young individuals and very, very few older individuals. And that is a type 3. So the answer here would be type 3 survivorship curve. Type 1 is pretty much the opposite. Let me see here. Yep, type 1 survivorship curves is typical of populations with low rates of juvenile mortality. So that would start with relatively low young populations and higher old populations. That would be type 1. That's where humans sit. So humans. hang out around there. Type 2 survivorship curve is one which the probability of survivorship doesn't really change with age. So that would be type 2. Doesn't really change a whole lot. And so you have roughly even numbers of individuals at every age. I think that's what that curve looks like. Now I've said that. Type 2 survivorship curve. Ooh. Age in relative units, number of survivors, log scale. I have represented this exactly opposite, and this feels like a really good, This is a cool moment for me because it tells me that the way that I have been thinking about this is just completely wrong. So I was drawing this as though number of survivors. Okay, yep. So now that I have my reference pulled up and I see what I've done wrong, representing this graphically incorrectly, but talking about it in correct terms. So we're going to go back to that survivorship type 1. So on this left side, we have survivorship. And more appropriately on the y, or on the x-axis rather, we have age in relative units. So relative age. For a type 3 curve, an oak tree produces thousands of acorns. So we have tons and tons of young acorns, but very few that grow into mature oak trees. Let me make sure that you can actually see me, or see what I'm drawing here. Yeah, we're going to get rid of my face again so that you can see this whole chart. Hide my face. There we go. All right. Survivorship on the y-axis. We're starting very, 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 very high number of acorns. There's a massive drop-off. So I had initially drawn this going high and to the right. That is incorrect. There's a massive drop-off in the early years, but then those that survive to become oak trees, that population remains fairly stable. So let me redraw that so that it's a little bit clearer what's going on. So these are your oak trees, and that is a type 3 survivorship curve. When I was talking about humans and survivorship, I drew it very much like this, and what I should have done is draw it like so, where we have high survivorship of young individuals, and then there's a steep drop-off of survivorship as humans get older. We die a lot faster. So high survivorship of young individuals, lower survivorship of older individuals. I'm going to rewrite that. That's a type 1 survivorship curve. This is what clued me into the fact that I was doing this graph just wrong, because the last one here is that type 2. And as I was explaining it, I realized my mistake. This graph here, type 2. Type 2 survivorship curve. Many bird species have type 2 survivorship curves, and in this curve, organisms die more or less equally at each age interval. And so organisms with this type of survivorship curve may also have relatively few offspring and provide significant parental care. Where these survivorships become important is also in terms of how individuals expend energy in assuring the survival of their offspring. if it is relatively cost efficient to produce lots of offspring, as in the case of the oak tree that can produce thousands and thousands of seeds, then you don't see a lot of behavior that is, I guess, protecting those offspring. Because the ones that do survive will persist for a very, very long time and will themselves produce many, many, many offspring. On the flip side, humans produce relatively very few offspring in our lives. This is called, the word is fecundity. I'm going to type it off in the margins here. But fecundity has to do with, specifically with the number of fertile females in a population, I want to say. So let me find my flashcard on that. Fecundity is the number of female offspring produced. By each female in the population. High fecundity results in a tendency of a population to grow quickly, reach sexual maturity at a young age, and then produce many, many small eggs or seeds. Cool. This is me going off on a tangent a little bit. Not a little bit, entirely. This is entirely me going off on a tangent, because I can, and we have time. And I find this very interesting. Let's see. So we talked about density-dependent and density-independent factors. So think about some other examples of dependent or independent factors. Density-independent factors could be things like daily temperature extremes are a pretty common example. These would be unrelated to population size. Density-dependent factors define carrying capacity within a species. Ooh, I see. Okay. So back up here in our density-dependent or density-independent, we have two varieties of density-dependent factors. Kinds of density-dependent factors causing decreases in decreased R in logistic growth. You'll see a new equation for that here if you haven't already soon. We have intra-specific, within a species, intra, within, species, specific, and with such examples as competition among members of a cohort for food. And we have inter, between, specific, between species, between different species. And these could be factors like predation, parasitism, but also competition for food. Predation without the K. What else can we talk about? I'm going to look up a vocab word here really quick because yeah. So here's a topic that is probably going to be on your exam if I remember correctly. And it's this idea of trade-offs between semal parity and iteroparity. Let me go ahead and write those down. All right. So simulparity is, let's see. Simulparity is a life history characterized by death after the first reproduction. And its alternative is iteroparity, living to reproduce repeatedly. Yeah. So simulparity and iteroparity are two contrasting reproductive strategies available to all living organisms, and a species is considered simulparous if it is characterized by a single reproductive episode before death, and iteroparous, many iterations, if it is characterized by multiple reproductive cycles over the course of a lifetime. And here's the key concept. Although there are organisms whose life histories fall somewhere between iteroparity and simulparity, life history always represents a trade-off because the energy cost of reproduction is high, and so there are not enough resources to reproduce often, produce many offspring, and take care of them all. So although there are organisms whose life histories fall somewhere between iteroparity and simulparity, life history always represents a trade-off because the energy cost of reproduction is high. So there are not enough resources to both reproduce often, all three, not both. There are not enough resources to reproduce often, produce many offspring, and take care of them. It's kind of like all three are important, pick two. Let me move this so that you can see it. There. I remember there being exam questions about this. And I actually remember it being open-ended. Aha. If I had scrolled down a little bit further, I would have found can I not copy and paste it from here? That's going to bum me out. Copy. Paste. Nope. It's not going to let me do it. Dang. Okay. Well. Cool. I believe next week is community ecology. Let me take a look just to confirm. Yep, population 2 and community ecology will be next week, and we will be diving into these topics a little bit differently. There's going to be more quantitative reasoning stuff, some more formulas to look at, more math, but we'll also be kind of spending some time really interpreting those tables and graphs, which will be, I think pretty helpful. At least they were for me. All right. Enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks, everybody.